UFC Fight Night. Whittaker versus Aliskerov. The UFC heads to Saudi Arabia this weekend, home of His Excellency, who seems to have a blossoming friendship with Dana White. MMA, of course, is the most recent sport to host an event in Saudi Arabia. Of course, we had the Live Golf Tour, boxing, Riyadh season. So this is just the latest venture. Hopefully, this deal with His Excellency will lead to some more money in these fighters' pockets, because we all know they deserve every penny they get. They're the reason why this sport exists, and they do a lot for our entertainment. So I'm going to go ahead and break down this card. Of course, we had that last-minute edition of Ikram Aliskerov, who was going to fight on last week's card because Hamzat, unfortunately had another health-related event that kept him out of the fight. Not really surprising at this point, but we'll get into that later. I'm going to start off breaking down the first fight, which is a bantamweight matchup between Xiao and ChangHo Li. Don't really know much about either of these guys. I don't watch Road to the UFC very closely, or really at all. ChangHo Li is coming off of a 3-fight KO streak, so he's red hot right now. Xiao is on a little bit of a streak as well, but he still kind of has that stench of that loss to Christian Quinones in the Contender Series that I just can't really overlook. ChangHo Li's got 3 KOs in a row. Why not keep the streak alive? He's a pretty explosive striker, and I think he's a really tough guy where if he gets on top of you, he's looking for the finish. So ChangHo Li by KO is the first pick. Next up, we go to the light heavyweight division where we have Magomed Gadzhiyasulov versus Brendson Ribeiro. Gadzhiyasulov is not your typical heavyweight plodding forward, just a big body. He utilizes a lot of movement. He's on his bike a lot. He's got good grappling, solid striking. I don't think he's the most powerful guy in the world, and he's definitely not the biggest. But he's a guy who I think is very athletic and, genuinely just in better shape than a lot of the guys that he's come across up until this point. Brendson Ribeiro is a guy who had a really impressive Dana White Contender Series fight. Got a KO as a huge underdog, and then ran into Zhang Mingyang and had one of the most entertaining 2.5-minute fights of the year. Ended up getting KO'd pretty brutally in that one, but he had his moments as well. It really just seemed like whoever was going to land cleaner first was going to get the KO. He was on the receiving end in that fight. I definitely think he could pose a threat to Gadzhiyasulov. He's going to push the pace. And he's got that long reach, long arms where he can definitely give Magomed some problems. But he's a little too reckless for my liking. I think Gadzhiyasulov is going to play this one safe and land a takedown. And Ribeiro off his back, I think, is going to be in trouble. I can see Gadzhiyasulov getting a ground and pound KO victory in this fight. We go back to the bantamweight division for a matchup between Kang and Muin Gafurov. Gafurov is still looking for his first UFC win. He's 0-2 or 0-3 by now. I think 0-3. I really don't see him posing much of a threat to Kang here. Kang's more experience, which I think Gafurov's inexperience is what has cost him in a lot of his fights, giving up his neck to Said Magomedov, for example. I think Kang's going to be the more accurate striker, and then he has that submission threat on top of it. He's got a lot of submission wins under his belt. I think Gafurov is just never really going to be in a position where he's any comfortable. Both these guys have losses to Castaneda, so we'll see which one of these guys comes on top. I'm going to back Kang by decision here, though. Next up, we have a welterweight fight between Rinat Fakhretdinov and Nicolas Dalby. Dalby had a fantastic upset win over Gabriel Bonfim. I believe that was last year. Showed great pressure. He was constantly moving forward and solid enough defensive grappling in that fight. Bonfim was able to take him down a couple of times, especially early on in the fight. But moving into the second round, Bonfim just really had nothing left, and Dalby just put the pressure on and got the KO. Fakhretdinov is the better wrestler than Gabriel Bonfim. The question is, can he take down Dalby at will. I think he will be able to. Dalby, I think he's a lot better at getting up than he is at just preventing the takedown in the first place. And Fakhretdinov's top pressure is no joke. He underwhelmed versus Zaleski dos Santos, but I think he's going to be... I think this is a much better matchup for him. Dalby's a bit smaller than Zaleski, who's bordering on, the lower end of 185ers almost. The guy always comes in big. I think Fakhretdinov is going to land the takedowns, and Dalby's just not going to have much of an answer for him. So I have him winning by decision. He should go up 2 rounds, and then Dalby could be the fresher guy going to the third. He just has to survive. Next up, we have a fight between Magomed Naimov and Felipe Lima. Naimov is 3-0 in the UFC, but really only one of those wins I give a whole lot of credence to, I guess, which is that KO win over Jamie Mullarkey, although it kind of feels like everyone's KOing Jamie Mullarkey as of late, unfortunately. Naimov is pretty well-rounded. He throws the crazy spinning kicks, and he actually lands them. He's coming off of a round 1 KO win over, I think it was Eric Silva, but that was kind of a tough one because Silva had, must have popped his Achilles or something. Not really directly as a result of Naimov. So, and then he had that fight with Nathaniel Wood, which he probably just lost. So, Naimov is really looking for another legitimate win here. And Felipe Lima is a really tough opponent. Super exciting, coming off of a 5-round, pretty dominant win in some European promotion, I believe. He comes by way of Brazil. He's got that, he's looking to get the finish pretty much at all times, which sometimes can be detrimental, where he'll end up on his back going for a choke or something, but I really like his aggressiveness. He's coming in on short notice, I believe, here, but I think he's ready. I think he has all the skills it takes. He hasn't lost since his debut. I'm taking Felipe Lima to win by decision here. Naimov, I think, is going to be too smart to give up his neck or anything, but Lima is, I think he's just going to be the more active guy, and especially late in the fight, I can see Naimov fading and Lima still being ready to go. Next up is a lightweight matchup between Nasrat Haqparast and Jared Gordon. Both these guys are coming off of KO wins. Nasrat versus, was it Jamie Mullarkey most recently? Nasrat's a guy who's got really good power. He likes to operate in space. Really clean striking. I think he's starting to find his footing as of late after a couple up and down fights. He's on a bit of a streak. Jared Gordon's coming off a KO himself over, what's the guy's name? I'm forgetting. The guy who the wrestler, he was like 12-0. Older guy, though. Mark Madsen. We picked Gordon to get a KO in that fight. I knew it was only a matter of time, and he started off a little slow, but he uses his dirty boxing really well. He's wants to stuff you up against the cage and take that more of that boxing approach, just, uptight in the clinch, and he's really good there, and I think he's a tough guy for a lot of guys to deal with. But Nasrat, I think, is physically strong enough to keep off of the cage and not get kind of bullied into a corner like Jared Gordon's going to want to do. And in open space, Nasrat's going to be the way quicker guy here. I think he's going to... And we saw Jared Gordon get KO'd, by Bobby Green. I think it was like a headbutt, but, that's just damage. And you got to wonder, even though, he took a lot of time off, you got to wonder how a KO like that for a guy who's already kind of up there in his career, how that sort of affects him. I'm taking Nasrat Haqparast to win by KO. Next up, we have first fight on the main card is Johnny Walker taking on Volkan Oezdemir. Guys, Johnny Walker cannot throw a punch. I don't know what it is. He can't throw a punch. His brother can't throw a punch. And I'm kind of sick of backing the guy. He's, got some good things going for him. He's explosive athlete. He's massive. He's going to be taller than anyone he fights. But, we've seen the guy just get KO'd almost cartoonishly a few times now, and I think a large part of that is because he can't really compete on the feet, and he relies on elbows and flying knees that are just kind of tough to get off versus some of these skilled strikers. Oezdemir is, he's been around the block, but super skilled on the feet. And I think he's just going to land on Johnny Walker, and I think he's just going to land quicker and hurt him. I just think it's much more reliable to rely on the guy with solid fundamental striking than the guy who's going for a flying knee or something, bombastic to try and land and put his opponent out. So we're taking Volkan Oezdemir to win by KO. He's the more skilled guy. We saw him get a big KO win over Bogdan Guskov, Guskov's been kind of making some waves in the light heavyweight division himself. So Oezdemir by KO is the pick. Next up, we have Shara Magomedov versus Antonio Trocoli. This is Trocoli's first fight since 2021. They're kind of throwing Magomedov a lob here. I honestly think it's a smart move on the UFC's part. Magomedov did not really look ready for the bright lights in his debut versus Bruno Silva. He did what he had to do, and he landed an insane head kick on Bruno Silva. It was like lightning quick. So he had his moments, and it's not like he didn't deserve to win that fight. But we saw he's another guy who I think his hands could use a lot of work. He was really scared to exchange with Bruno Silva. He was kind of tentative a bit. His kicks are definitely very impressive, and I think that should be enough to handle Antonio Trocoli. But it's just hard to rely on a guy to land a head kick to put his opponent out. That being said, Trocoli, ring rust is going to be a big issue. Feels like he was handpicked to get Magomedov's hype train back on the tracks. So I think Shara is going to win this one by KO. He definitely has the skill set to do it, to have a pretty highlight reel knockout here. We'll just see if he can get it done. Moving on, we have Kelvin Gastelum versus Daniel Rodriguez. Such a joke. This fight was moved to 185 because Kelvin Gastelum couldn't put the fork down. It's pretty funny that the guy has like this food blog, and in the midst of that, he's trying to make this move to 170 down from 185 so late in his career. Good on Gastelum. He's going to be the bigger guy in this fight now. He pretty much faced no repercussions for missing weight up to this point. So we'll see if the UFC decides to discipline him at all. I think it's pretty some nonsense that, we're just going to put this fight at 185 and not have any of the, any of his purse taken away, anything like that. Props to D-Rod for taking this fight against his opponent, who basically missed weight by 15 pounds. This tells me that Kelvin Gastelum is just not locked in. Was this a plot to he never even planned on making weight? Who knows? But I'm going to take the guy who's clearly more disciplined in Daniel Rodriguez, and I think he has the skill set as well. Solid striking, solid power. Yeah, he struggled against Ian Gary, but Gastelum is at this point in his career is not as dangerous as some of those guys. We're taking Daniel Rodriguez to win this one by decision. Next up, we have a co-main event between Sergei Pavlovich and Alexander Volkov. Weird heavyweight matchup. Didn't want to see it. I would have rather see Pavlovich versus basically anyone else. Who wants to see two friends fight? They were trying to gas this fight up during the ceremonial weigh-ins. Volkov, claiming, oh, so you did want to take this fight? Volkov swears he doesn't. It feels kind of forced. I think these guys, they're countrymen, and I kind of have this working theory that some of these, Russian fighters, that they kind of go easy on each other. I mean, total conspiracy on my part, but these guys are friends, and I could see Pavlovich taking a little bit of gas off of his punches or something. So with that in mind, I like the over in this fight. And, if this one goes deep into the fight, Volkov, we could see him start to really land. His height could be an issue for Pavlovich, Pavlovich got really long arms, but Volkov has the kickboxing skills to kind of keep Pavlovich at bay. And we haven't really seen Pavlovich later into the second and third rounds. So I think there is a path for Volkov to win this one by a decision. Honestly, either guy could get KO'd as well. And Volkov is just on a nice little win streak himself. We saw Pavlovich get put out cold versus Aspinall, so we don't really know how he's going to respond to that. So Volkov by decision is going to be the pick there. I'll be pretty hyped up if that one hits. Finally, we have our main event. It is Robert Whittaker taking on Ikram Aliskerov. Like we touched on, Aliskerov is the late replacement for Khamzat Chimaev, who's dealing with yet another health-related issue. He says it was food poisoning. I don't know. I really have my concerns about his health. And, I hope he has someone smart in his corner doing the right thing for him in his career and his life beyond fighting, because if this is something deeper than just the food poisoning or whatever they're claiming, it's just concerning. So all that aside, of course, Ikram is replacing the only man to ever defeat him in Khamzat. He's 16-1 overall. Got 2 wins in the UFC versus Phil Hawes and Warlley Alves. Looked impressive in both of those fights. I mean, Phil Hawes is kind of like Derek Brunson, and he looks like one of the best fighters in the world for about a minute and a half. And then he just inevitably kind of gets KO'd. But we saw Ikram face a little bit of adversity there. Got hit hard, showed a good chin versus Phil Hawes. And he's got a really clean, straight combination that he likes to throw that landed clean on Phil Hawes and put him right out. Warlley Alves, he had a crazy flying knee. So this guy has just come in and put the whole UFC on watch. I think a main event spot for him is justified, and I'm glad that we're seeing him fight Whittaker here. Whittaker's a tough matchup, though. He's going to be the more skilled guy for sure. He's got the 5-round experience, of course, being in those battles with Adesanya. I felt he won the rematch with Adesanya. But for me, the question here is whose body is going to hold up. Whittaker, super skilled. He knows how to fight at range and get his shots off. But in a 5-round fight, and with 2 guys, this big, they're gonna get into some frantic exchanges. And I think Ikram is going to have more power, and I think his chin's going to hold up a bit better than Whittaker, who we've seen get wobbled in consecutive fights now, versus DDP, who really sat him down with a jab, although, Whittaker was kind of moving into it, but sat him down with a stiff jab, and then Paulo wobbled him bad with that spinning back kick. So I worry about Whittaker and, how his body is going to hold up. Ikram doesn't have the mileage that Whittaker has. And he's got a lot of power. I think he's going to be able to track Whittaker down sooner or later and land some straight shots that could really hurt Whittaker. So Ikram by KO is the pick. Should be a fascinating matchup. Of course, at his best, Whittaker is among the best in the middleweight division that we've ever seen. So I really like this matchup. Honestly, I'm pretty much just as excited for this as I was versus Khamzat Chimaev, who I think Chimaev, honestly, even though he defeated Ikram, I really didn't feel like Khamzat was up to the challenge of a guy like Robert Whittaker quite yet. So it remains to be seen what they'll do with Khamzat. I mean, an Aliskerov win here could set up a crazy rematch with Chimaev. That could be really interesting. Some really cool storylines going into that one. But with that is the Phone Home MMA Breakdown. Thank you all for watching, and be sure to check out next week's.